everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I have a Honda Accord with a driver's window that will not move up and down. As you can see, moves a little bit, but it won't fully open or close, and it's got about a ½ inch here that it won't close completely. As you can hear, the motor is still working, which is a good sign that the motor is fine. More than likely what has failed in here is the regulator assembly. I'm going to take the door panel off, show you the old one, show you the new one, show you what failed, and how you can do this yourself and save some money. Now, the number one mistake that I have seen people make, and that I've made myself, when taking door panels off is not removing all the retainers and then forcing the panel off and breaking it. Make sure you have a couple tools handy. A lot of times all you need is a few screwdrivers to get the door panel off. Sometimes you'll need some 8 and 10 millimeter sockets, but generally all you need are screwdrivers. And in the case of this Honda Accord, we have one screw hidden behind this little panel here. Actually, there are two screws. Another screw down here by the grab handle. And remove the little mirror access plate. Now comes the tricky part, and the part where stuff usually breaks. You can use screwdrivers, but what I've found works even better is a little plastic trim remover tool like this here. You can get these at any auto parts store, any tool store, they'll have them. And basically what you're going to want to do is slide the tool in between the frame of the door and the door panel and pull out. This is going to loosen up on the little push pins that hold the door panel in place, and you'll be able to remove the door panel. Once the door panel's off far enough that you can use your fingers, you can do just that. It's a little easier. One thing to remember is always start at the bottom, because on most door panels, the door panel hangs from the top here on the door frame. If you try to pull it off from the top first, you're going to damage the door panel. And without too much trouble, off it comes. You'll have to disconnect the cable going to the door handle, but it's usually pretty simple. Just be careful to not break the brittle and probably very thin and breakable plastic pieces. Don't forget to disconnect the wiring. And there you have it. The door panel is free. Now, if one of these little plastic white clips breaks or falls off, don't worry. You can get replacement clips at your local auto parts store. Most of them have them in stock, and they simply snap back on. This plastic that you see on here is called the weather shield. It helps keep moisture outside of the vehicle and also helps with noise a little bit, but it's more so for keeping moisture out. This simply just pulls off the vehicle. A lot of times you will be able to reuse this, but in some extreme cases you may not be able to. Now that we've gotten the door panel off and the weather shield out of the way, you're probably wondering, look at all these bolts, which bolts do I take off? And that's where it comes in really handy to take your new window regulator, as you see right here, hold it up to the door panel and compare to where the screws line up. As you can see, we've got 3 screws here, most likely for the motor, and then we have another 2 screws over here, which are most likely for the regulator. So there's 2 here, 2 down here, and 3 for the motor. Most likely these are the 7 screws which have to come out to release the old regulator and put the new one in. One last thing you need to be aware of. The window actually bolts to the regulator assembly. As you can see here, there are 2 openings in the regulator where 2 10mm bolts secure the window to this regulator bracket that moves up and down. The only problem is the window isn't moving, so we can't move the window to get the little bolts to line up with these holes to take the bolts out and detach the regulator from the window. So we'll have to take the regulator and motor bolts out, but not all of them. This one here, as you can see, we'll have to remove completely. However, the one next to it to the right, this one only has to be loosened partially. Once these have been loosened partially, the regulator and motor can be shifted to the side and slid out. These bolts actually help hold the new one in place as well. When you install your new regulator and motor, make sure to install these bolts partially so they'll help hold it in place. But if you still cannot maneuver the window around enough to get to the bolt to release the window from the regulator, and this is what's going on with this vehicle right now, this is when it's really nice to have one of these ratcheting wrenches. You can sneak it behind the door here and get on that 10mm bolt and loosen it up and remove the window from the regulator. Once you've got the glass loose, it just slides right out. Disconnect the wiring from the old motor. And finally, out comes the old regulator. And as you can see, it was the cable. The cable began to unravel itself, as you can see here on the track. And it's almost completely broken down in here. That's why the window was no longer going up and down. Now the installation procedure is pretty much the opposite of what you did to get the old one out. Don't forget to take your 3 screws that you left behind on the old motor and regulator, and thread them back into the same openings on the motor and regulator to hold it in place during the reinstallation. Then install the remaining bolts onto the regulator and the motor. Once you've got all the bolts started, go ahead and tighten them up by hand. You want to make sure that initially you're only putting them in loosely so you can move the regulator around and adjust it as needed. But once it's all lined up, tighten them down. Don't forget to plug the connector into the motor. Most new window regulators, as you see in this case right here, have the holes for the window glass lined up with the holes in the door panel to tighten them up. But if they're not, you can always plug in the window switches on the door panel and adjust the regulator accordingly to get it to line up. Now, because of all the grease from the regulator and the cables and everything getting the window out, as you can see in the light here, you're probably going to have a lot of dirt, grease, and fingerprints on the window. It's a good idea to clean this before you put it back in the car. And the reason being is if you put it back in now, any grease is going to get on the window seals. And as the window moves up and down, that grease is going to get in those seals, and then every time you open and close the window, it's going to recoat the glass with grease. So before you put this window back in the car, take some cleaner and clean the glass up. Make it nice and pretty. Get all that grease off. Then very carefully reinstall the glass. Once the glass is installed, you'll see that the regulator lines up with the little holes down here. All you have to do is take your 2 10mm screws, which you took out earlier, and re-secure the window to the regulator. Most of the times you can reuse the weather seal and the adhesive. Just do your best to get it to stick back on there where it was before. That way you don't have any problems with putting the door panel back on. Reconnect all the wires to the window and lock switches. Make sure the lock rod over here lines up with the little hole in the door panel, just like so. And then just hang the door panel from the door for now. Now before you finish up completely and re-secure the panel to the car, turn the car on and make sure the window works. Looks good. Now you can reinstall the 3 screws on the door panel and push all the push pins back into place and make sure that the door panel is secured properly. Now there's one more thing you need to do. Before you give the vehicle back to the owner, make sure that everything here works. Make sure the door locks work, the windows work, the power mirrors work, everything works. You have no idea how many times I've seen people do work on door panels and windows and different things like that, and they don't bother to check to make sure all this stuff works, and a lot of times they've forgotten to plug wire in. In this case, we know everything's working, everything looks good, so this vehicle is good to go back to the owner. So there you have it, everyone. That is how you replace a defective window regulator in your car. Obviously, there are all different types of these things. A lot of the cheaper ones use cables. Some of the more reliable ones, such as the window regulators in this Excursion, have mechanical linkages with no cables, and they're usually much more reliable. But these parts aren't too expensive to get, and as I said earlier, the job can be done by you if you have some very basic hand tools like you see on the ground there. I hope you guys found this video helpful and interesting. Give it a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, as I'll have more how to fix it videos coming soon. See you guys in the next video.